Joe Biden, the great divider in chief. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Joe Biden campaigned on uniting the country, and yet he's done anything but. Before I get into that, I want to give a quick shout out to edify.app/podcasts, which is the place to go if you want faith-based podcasts. And guess what? Bold and Blunt is among their great lineup. So check out Bold and Blunt at Edify, and also check out Bold and Blunt anywhere podcasts are offered. I would love to have you as a regular listener. And you can subscribe to Bold and Blunt and my newsletter, my 3 times a week newsletter, by going to WashingtonTimes.com, scrolling to the bottom of the page, look under the newsletter section, and there you will find my name. Click on it, and 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you can have my commentaries and my podcasts delivered straight to your email box. I would love your support, and I appreciate those out there who currently do support my work and that of the Washington Times. So, Joe Biden, the great uniter-in-chief or divider-in-chief? Let's take a listen. This was Joe Biden in August of 2020 on the campaign trail.
Here and now, I give you my word.
My word.
If you entrust me with the presidency, I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an ally of the light, not the darkness. It's time for us, for we the people, to come together. And make no mistake, united we can and will overcome this season of darkness in America.
Okay, what a great speech, right? This, conversely, was Joe Biden in July 2021.
Right now, as I speak to you, millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk.
It's the virus of the unvaccinated. In other words, those in America who have chosen not to get vaccinated or fully vaccinated, whatever that definition may be, because it keeps changing. It used to be just a shot, 2 shots. Now it's, 4 boosters, 5 boosters, anybody's guess number of boosters. But it's the fault of those who have chosen not to get vaccinated. It's their fault for bringing this gloom and doom and shutdowns on American individual liberties into America. Well, science says otherwise, because the more we hear about the vaccinations, the more we discover that they only work for a certain amount of time, and then you have to go back and get a booster. And they don't work at the level in which they were promised to work from the beginning. Remember when Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson came out and their tests showed, their research showed that their shots were 98% effective and above 90% effective. And as the months wore on and more research was conducted, we find out that, 90% effective is really more like, 20-25% effective. But if you get a booster, then that zaps you right back up to the 50% effective category or the 60% effective. And yes, at this point, I'm just throwing out numbers, but that's because I'm following the science. That's what the scientists do. That's what the medical bureaucrats in the federal government do. They just throw out numbers here, throw out numbers there. So look, I'm a scientist too. I can do that. So how come when I do it, though, I will be labeled as a domestic enemy of America by this White House administration, but when the bureaucrats in the CDC do it, or Anthony Fauci does it, or even Bill Gates, who's not even a doctor, does it, then it's called sound science. That doesn't sound very unifying to me. Here's some more rhetoric from Joe Biden, the great unifier. This is from the anniversary of January 6th, of course.
He's not just a former president.
Trump.
He's a defeated former president. Defeated by a margin of over 7 million of your votes in a full and free and fair election. I did not seek this fight brought to this Capitol 1 year ago today, but I will not shrink from it either. I will stand in this breach. I will defend this nation. And I will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy.
Good Lord. He's talking about people who support Donald Trump. He's talking about American citizens who support Donald Trump. And he's talking about defending the Democrats, his party, the anti-Trump faction, against Donald Trump supporters by placing a dagger at the throat of democracy, or whatever it was he said. The mainstream media called that fiery rhetoric. I'll go a little bit further. I think it's divisive rhetoric, at the very least. I think it's maybe even horrific rhetoric. You don't want to hear that from your president. Like him or hate him, Joe Biden is supposed to represent all of America. Specifically, he's supposed to represent and defend the Constitution for all of America. He fails miserably on that role, but still, that's the ultimate. That's what he's supposed to do. And so to talk about American citizens with such fiery language and to slam the former president of the United States, who still has considerable support, more support than Joe Biden does, is akin to slamming all the citizens of the United States who still support Donald Trump. It's bad enough when Hillary Clinton calls Trump supporters deplorables. Now we've got this president who's weak. Did I say weak? And yet he tries to portray himself as strong by attacking those who oppose him, painting them as domestic enemies, painting those who don't want to wear face masks or refuse to get the vaccine as unpatriotic. This isn't uniting language. This isn't as Joe Biden promised in August of 2020 on the campaign trail, to be the ally of light and take a stand against the darkness and so forth and so on. American voters aren't fooled. This is why Joe Biden's polls, his approval ratings, are so far in the dumps. His first press conference in God knows how long couldn't save him. As a matter of fact, his first press conference in God knows how long drove his ratings even lower. Look at the headlines a day after Joe Biden's hour-and-a-half plus long press conference. NBC News, poll numbers are pointing to a midterm shellacking for Democrats. The Hill, Biden job approval at 43% amid low marks on economy pandemic. That's from an NBC poll. The day after Joe Biden came out to speak to the American public, to speak to the American people, and try and bolster his job approval, which has been low for weeks now, for months now. It's been on a continuous downswing. If there's one thing that you can say about this president in terms of reliability, it's the reliability of his poll numbers falling. I mean, that's been a continuous trend. Look, you know it's bad when your water carriers in the press can't even carry water for you anymore. Not only NBC came out and showed his favor even lower than previously reported, but AP, the Associated Press /NORC Center for Public Affairs Research came out with a poll as well. The headline of the story was this: Biden approval hits new low at 1 year mark. More Americans, from the AP report, more Americans disapprove than approve of how Biden is handling his job as president. 56% to 43%. As of now, as of the date of this poll, the story was January 20th, 2022. As of now, just 28% of Americans say they want Biden to run for re-election in 2024, including and this is rather astonishing, including only 48% of Democrats. That comes after Biden, in his press conference, when asked about his falling favor with the American people, when asked about his falling poll numbers, answered this: I don't believe the polls. Well, when polls come out and they show consistently that the American people don't want you as their leader, maybe it's time to sit up and take notice. Maybe it's time to consider that, yes, polls are frequently wrong, but when poll after poll after poll after poll after poll, you see where I'm going with this, right? When so many polls all point in the same direction, even the pollsters that normally would bend over backwards to find any loophole in their polling questions in order to support you are pointing to dwindling favor. Maybe, perhaps, potentially, it's time to consider a course correction. Just 45% say they approve of Biden's handling of COVID-19, down from 57% in December and from 66% in July 2021. So between December and now in January, not even a full month, right? His approval rating with COVID has gone from 57 to 45%. And the economy, only 37% approve now. Inflation. The inflation that this administration tries to sell as a positive, they try to spin it as actually it's a good thing when you have inflation. That's a good thing for the economy. Americans aren't buying that. Look, let me give you a couple of quotes from this story that I find very interesting. Gary Cameron, 66, of Midwest City, Oklahoma, said, "The president's verbal gaffes and age," he's 79, remember, "don't give him confidence that Biden has the skill or energy to pull the country from its current depths of darkness." The very same darkness, if you recall the clip I played from August 2020, that Joe Biden promised would come to an end, that hasn't. This is what Gary Cameron says. Whenever he does a speech on television, in your mind, you're thinking, God, is this guy even going to get through this speech? That right there is probably the singular summary of the Joe Biden administration. We all watch him on television. We all watch him when he speaks. And we don't watch him so much for what he says as we sit there and wonder exactly what Gary Cameron of Midwest City, Oklahoma said. Is he going to make it through the speech? But there are still those out there that steadfastly support this guy. And there's another quote in this story from another person who was interviewed that I find very enlightening about how the Democrats in general think. They don't think, they use emotion, right? Nicole Jensen Oost, OOST, 79, of Plano, Texas, says, Biden has demonstrated leadership and empathy through the pandemic by speaking of his own personal grief. This is what she says. This man, meaning Biden, has heart. He's compassionate, and the country needs that right now. We didn't see a lot of compassion in the previous 4 years. So Democrats, that's very enlightening to how they think. If you act as if you care, that's what it takes to get Democrats, to get leftists, to get socialists, to get the non-thinking types to support you. And Democrats have been strategically playing on the unthinking types in America to draw votes. Democrats don't actually have to provide what they preach. They don't actually have to give free college. They don't actually have to give free daycare. They don't actually have to give free health care. They just have to promise to give free college, free health care, free child care. And that's enough to win the favor of the non-thinking types in America, which is pretty much all in the Democrat Party. Because if you stand up in front of the American people and promise to provide this and that and this and that for free, it shows that you care. That's how the left thinks. That's not very American. In America, it's all about individual rights and individual accountability, or at least it's supposed to be. But we've gone so far from that principle. We've strayed so far from that notion of individual rights, of God-given rights, of individual accountability, that the Democrats have made a whole power play based on that. And now their whole party is geared toward promising free stuff without actually having to do the hard thinking that goes along with either coming up with the funds to provide this free stuff or being honest enough to say that they don't have the funds to provide it. And so the American people need to come up with some other way of providing those funds. Democrats just talk about giving this, giving that, and then you have people like this woman, Jansen Oost, 79 years old, from Plano, Texas, thinking, well, this politician, this president is a good guy because he cares so much, and that's going to make me vote for him. That's how the Democrat Party has been running candidates for years now, and look, Joe Biden's in the White House. There are Democrats in office, so their message is resonating, and this is the battleground in America. Are we a nation of God-given rights, or are we a nation where government grants rights to whom they choose, and conversely withholds rights from whom they choose? What we need in America is a course correction nationwide, mostly with the Democrat Party, but there are some in the Republican Party who are walking toward this free giveaway type of governance as well, who are walking away from individual accountability, meaning individualism and limited government, and turning the corner toward big government, bigger government, and thinking that, hey, this is the wave of the future. I need to get aboard. Well, I have a guest with me today, Philip K. Howard. He is chairman of the board of commongood.org. And he thinks he has a solution, along with the other members of commongood.org, in how to chart this necessary course correction for America. Since Joe Biden obviously can't unite us, maybe it's up to the American people to do the job instead. Philip's here to discuss. Philip Howard, chair of Common Good and senior counsel for the firm Covington and Burling. Thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Nice to be with you.
So I wanted to discuss a little bit of this piece that you wrote for Newsweek, an opinion piece on how to overcome distrust of government. Can you explain what that piece was about?
Yeah, people, Americans are fed up, and we tend to point fingers at other people. You know, we think that somebody else is pushing the wrong buttons. And, you know, whether it's the black rioters in 2020 or people storming the Capitol, you know, in 2021, and the distrust sort of grows as people get more fed up. But what's been lost is a sense that things actually can work, and a forum where people can actually sit down with other people and work together. So this polarization, I think, is driven by sort of underlying causes for distrust, and that's a sense of powerlessness, and a sense that we can't just get up and work things out with other people to make schools work or to make anything work well. So, you know, everyone focuses on identity politics or trying to argue against the other side, and I think it's much more basic than that. I think there's a flaw in how we govern our society. We've got this kind of red tape society where everybody pounds the table for their entitlements, and nobody can make anything work sensibly, whether it's the schools or the hospitals or anything. So I think we need to go back to basics.
And you call for individual accountability, which I think is great. But let me throw this question out there to you. The society that you describe we're living under right now, the red tape society, isn't that sort of the creation of the far left, though, to make citizens of society dependent upon the government? And so if you fight that, wouldn't that just add to the partisanship and the division that you're trying actually to smooth?
Well, maybe. I mean, there are certainly losers in what I'm saying, starting with everyone in Washington, because Washington is this giant engine of the status quo. You know, there are 10,000 interest groups that all somehow or another are at the trough, right, of government, and they're sitting there trying to protect it. I mean, the biggest ones are people like the teachers' unions and the public unions that love the system the way it is, and they actually preempt democracy. You elect a mayor and he can't run the police force, he can't run the schools because of the union contract. So sure, there'll be a fight to restore accountability. There'll be a fight to get rid of all this red tape, but it's not a fight. Or it shouldn't be a fight, against, in the traditional interest group sense right now. It shouldn't be a left-right thing. It should be people who want things to work and want to have a hand in that versus people who like the status quo. You are correct that this current red tape nation came out of the 1960s with all these liberal reforms, and one of their ideas was we can guarantee that no one will ever do things incorrectly, if we write 1,000-page rule books and tell them how to do things. And all it is central planning,
right,
that causes failure. So it's so you're right that it mainly came out of the left, but one of the problems with at least a certain strand of conservatism is that it doesn't want any public employee to have any authority. And that's a problem, too, because the principal needs to have authority over the school, and the teacher needs to have authority over the classroom, and the official needs to have authority to give a permit for infrastructure. So the alternative to red tape isn't necessarily no government. It's sort of a goals-based government where, an official has a job to get something done, and if he doesn't get it done, he's accountable and can get fired.
So it seems to me that one way of looking at your campaign for common good, which is outlined at commongood.org, and I suggest that everybody take a look at this website. It's got some good stuff on there. What I'm taking away from what you're saying is the appeal for the common good is more like an appeal for common sense, which kind of removes it right away from the partisanship and viciousness of the politicking on Capitol Hill, and puts it into the hands of the masses of citizens in America who aren't so political but just want the same things that most people want: good education for their kids, the ability to put food on their table. Is that correct?
Yeah, completely. So when people say they want common sense, they mean different things. But what I mean is that the person on the ground has the authority, is re-empowered to do what he or she thinks is right, and is accountable to somebody else or other people who have the authority to decide whether that person is any good as you name it, teacher or inspector or whatever. And that basic kind of framework of really any working organization, and certainly democracy, has been completely lost in our society. When you have all these rules, when you have all these procedures, when you have all these lawsuits, whenever anybody doesn't like something, they say, "Give me my rights." Or, "What do you mean? What about my rights?" And we've taken away the ability of people on the ground to say, "Here's what makes sense in this situation, and so I'm going to go this way." And we've taken it away from parents to say, well, that principal's not doing a good job, or that teacher, and therefore we need to get a new principal or teacher. And that basic mechanism of a free society, which is somebody takes responsibility, somebody else judges them, is really the only way anything works. And if you look at anything that does work, that's how it works.
Right.
And we've created a society where instead everybody just argues over legalisms.
In a sense, what you described is sort of the foundational arguments that have been with America since its beginning, the idea of self-rule versus big government rule. And what I like about when I saw on your website, I checked out the advisory board and your staff and so forth. And what I found very interesting and what I liked was that you had people who were from both parties. You had Bill Bradley, a former U.S. Senator who was with the Democrat Party, as well as Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, with the Republican Party. So was that a purposeful intent to reach out to both political parties, or was that just something that came about as you looked for people with common sense?
Well, it was deliberate. I mean, George McGovern was also on our advisory board, and Tom Kaine and Al Simpson is still on the board. But the reality is that Democrats today who are sitting can't subscribe to what we're saying because, for example, accountability is the key to empowering people. Nobody's going to let anybody make whatever decision they want and not be accountable. That's not the way to get out of distrust. That's a formula for distrust.
Right.
But the Democrats' leading interest group and supporter are the public unions. And the public unions basically exist to avoid any accountability for their members. So no sitting Democrat can do what I'm talking about. We get all these Democrats who've left office and no longer need to count out of the public unions who agree with us. But, the Democratic Party will never, as it's currently constituted, will never do what we say, even though behind closed doors, most Democratic governors and most Democratic mayors and leaders would agree completely.
Right. The beast has grown too burdensome in D.C. That's why it's so when you look at your website, and I know you have a petition for common good, pragmatically speaking, where do you intend this to go? How are you going to implement the provisions of common good type visioning for governance? Okay.
Well, there are certain things that we can do and bring people together. We did a paper on how lengthy environmental reviews and infrastructure permitting is actually harmful to the environment. Mm-hmm. and no one could refute it because it's true. You have all these bottlenecks, and it takes 10 years to get a permit. Well, that's 10 years of pollution. So the new infrastructure bill, the one that passed, the $1.2 trillion, includes our reforms.
Very
so
good.
We actually got some reforms done, and we work with Senate staff to make that happen. With the public unions, there's no way politically you can make this happen, so that we are working on a project which we'll release in 2 months or so, arguing that collective bargaining by public employees should be unconstitutional because it's preempted democracy. We elect people to run the schools, and they don't have the authority to run the schools.
Right.
It's just basic. So we're going to take that argument to the courts, and we're going to basically say you have to declare collective bargaining to be unconstitutional because democracy no longer functions. And so we have various ways of trying to dislodge the status quo, and that's hard to do, but that's what's needed. And the thing that I'd like to encourage you and other right-thinking people to understand is we can't repair this system. You have 150 million words of binding federal law and regulation, it is suffocating sensible choices at every level of society. You can't repair it. You have to replace it. You have to replace it not with no government, but with a government that's an open framework that allows people to use their common sense.
Right. And how is this different from Newt Gingrich's contract with America, or with what Kevin McCarthy just came out with, his announced promises to voters and so forth?
Well, I haven't studied Congressman McCarthy's report, but Newt and I talk with some regularity, and the contract for America had some of these items in it. It was more goal-oriented, sort of we should have lower taxes, that sort of thing, which is not something we take a position on. But he agrees about the dysfunction of the operating system, which is what I'm talking about. So there's a difference between goals. Do you believe in climate change? Do you believe in lower taxes? Do you believe in, whatever? Those are goals that the parties disagree on. That's one thing. But whatever government does, it ought to do so effectively and do so without ramming it down people's throats. That's the operating system. That's all the red tape and the 1,000-page rule books and the lawsuits and all that. And so we focus on the operating system. And Newt has been very supportive of our efforts to fix the operating system. And but I think it's important. I think the Republicans are missing a huge opportunity to appeal to a broad swath of America by not having this as part of their platform. Everybody tends to, again, focus on their goals. The goals of let's don't have critical race theory in the schools, or let's have lower taxes. And I understand that, but Americans are really frustrated by the fact that nothing works.
Right.
And having, I did an essay for the Ripon Forum, which is a Republican policy journal, in the fall, about what a Republican platform, on this would look like, and it included these three elements. The first element of if I were leading the Republican Party would be, let's appoint spring cleaning commissions, just to simplify and make sense of existing laws, not necessarily get rid of them, just because none of them work.
Right.
None of them. They just piled up like sediment in the harbor. The second thing is, let's get rid of public unions because they've made democracy unaccountable. This is the thing that I'm working on. That's incredibly important. It's important if you're a Democratic governor, too. They just can't say it. And the third point is, you can't let people abuse the court process use it as a sort of system of extortion. So let's create a justice system where judges are re-empowered to draw boundaries to defend the freedoms of ordinary Americans. If somebody can lose their reputation and career because they have a slip of the tongue, or they pull a student away from another student,
right,
they're threatening them. They say, "You have no right to touch me," whatever. When it was an unlawful touching. Teachers can't run the classroom. Those three things are just basic things.
These are all worthy ideas, and our time is pretty much at an end, but I did want to give you one chance to explain to individuals how they can get involved in this. Aside from going to commongood.org and checking out the principles, what can individuals do?
Well, first of all, we go to the website, see our platform, give us comments, but it's really important to think about what doesn't work in their community. And we can come up with ideas about how to deal with school bureaucracy and deal with other things, that are frustrating to people. And if you get communities to start working together to simplify their frameworks and to re-empower everybody to use their common sense, then stuff will change. So it does require action. It isn't just sitting in your living room, but it requires getting together with your neighbors. And if people want to do that, we'll help them.
Get the grassroots involved, and then things really start happening. Thank you so much. Philip Howard, Chair of Common Good, commongood.org. I hope people go and check out these ideas. They're great, they're necessary, and thank you for your time.
So nice to be with you. Thank you.
Well, that's another Bold and Blunt wrapped. If you like Bold and Blunt, please check out edify.app/podcast, where you will find, among all these faith-based podcasts, Bold and Blunt. You can subscribe there. You can subscribe to Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered, and especially at WashingtonTimes.com. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.